My son jabbed a polished finger in my direction inside the living room I had renovated board by board with my own sweat and shouted, "Cover your $2,000 of rent or get out." I didn't argue. I just zipped up a small bag and walked straight out the front door. He thought he had finally cornered me. What he didn't know was that I was the legal owner of the place. And he definitely didn't know that my very next call was to a property broker. A week later, when the eviction notice with his name on it landed in the mailbox, he rang me in a panic, crying, furious. But the words I answered with left him frozen, before I share how a quiet father's choice shattered his son's illusion of control. Drop a comment below telling me where you're tuning in from, and don't forget to like and subscribe if you believe respect is earned, not handed down. The silence in that house was heavier than the muggy summer air drifting in from Miami Beach. My son, Daniel, stood with his arms folded tight, clutching his smartphone like it was some kind of weapon. His wife, Rebecca, leaned lazily against the marble countertop, the one I had installed myself one blistering August, her smirk plastered on like cheap wallpaper. I knew instantly she was the strategist behind this ambush. Daniel's numbers were her script. The spreadsheets, the so-called logic, that was her weapon of choice. "It's simple, Mark," Rebecca said, her voice sharp but silky. She slid a printed sheet across the counter. A spreadsheet, of course. Itemized boxes for property tax, insurance, electricity, and even a line for yard maintenance, which in reality was me sweating under the Florida sun every Saturday. With a mower. The total cost of carrying this house is just above $6,000 a month. There are 3 of us and 1 of you. Your share is $2,000. That's fair. Fair. That word echoed like a cruel joke. This house hadn't had a loan attached to it in nearly 2 decades. My late wife Linda and I had torched the mortgage, papers together in the backyard, celebrating freedom as the ash drifted into the humid night. She'd called this place our castle. Now, her son was trying to make me a mere renter inside its walls. I looked from Rebecca's cold smile to Daniel's stiff jawline. There was something brittle in his eyes, a stubborn defiance that dared me to push back. This wasn't the boy I'd taught to fish off the pier just down the street, the one whose scraped elbows I had patched after skateboard spills. This was someone else entirely, wearing his face. "This is my home, Daniel," I said, my voice coming out lower than I'd planned. "Your mother and I paid for every board, every shingle, every square foot. And now we're the ones paying. For it," he snapped back, his tone sharp. "We cover the groceries, the streaming services, the utilities. We're pouring money into this place while you just sit on your pension." The groceries he talked about? Boxes of imported chocolates, bottles of craft wine, and specialty meats that cost more than what I used to spend in a week. The internet? The top-tier package Rebecca insisted on for Daniel's remote work. Work that mostly looked like video calls taken from the patio while he sipped cocktails. They'd moved in 6 months after Linda passed, under the pretense of helping me cope. "Just for a little while, Dad," Daniel had said back then, tears in his eyes. "So you won't be alone." A little while had quietly stretched into 2 years. And their help had morphed into something else, a creeping takeover. First, it was Rebecca's candles replacing Linda's lavender ones. Then Daniel's exercise equipment stacking up in the garage. Later, they painted the living room a cold, sterile white without so much as asking. Last month, they claimed the master suite, my room, Linda's room, telling me the upstairs was too dangerous for me now. I was shoved into the tiny guest bedroom on the first floor, a visitor in the very house I had built for my family. And now this, rent. A demand for payment to live in a place that was, in every sense, mine. Rebecca, seeing my pause, nudged the spreadsheet closer with her manicured nails. "We're not trying to make things hard, Mark, but we have responsibilities. Daniel needs to maintain a certain lifestyle for his clients. That's impossible if we're covering everything here." That's when it happened. The break. Not an explosion of anger. Something colder, steadier. The kind of clarity you get when a carpenter finally finds the true grain in a warped piece of wood. Daniel mistook my silence for surrender. He stepped closer, delivering the final strike. "Dad, Rebecca's right. We can't keep shouldering this alone. If you can't pitch in your share, then maybe you should find somewhere else you can afford. This is our home now. So, either pay the rent or get out." My eyes drifted to the oak dining table. Linda and I had found it years ago at a flea market in Little Havana. I could still hear us laughing, trying to wedge it into the back of my old pickup. I could almost smell the lemon oil she rubbed into its surface every Sunday. In that moment, I realized I wasn't just defending a house. I was protecting the memory of a love they were trying to slap a price tag on. I pushed my chair back, its wooden legs whispering across the tile floor. I looked at my son, at the stranger he had turned into, and gave him the one thing he never expected: quiet surrender. "All right," I said. The word was small, but it filled the entire room. Rebecca's smirk stretched wider. Daniel blinked, caught off guard by the absence of a fight. "All right, what?" he asked. "You're right," I replied evenly. "It's time for me to leave." I stood, walked past them without another word, and headed toward the guest room. They didn't trail behind. They were too busy basking in their little triumph. They couldn't hear the faint sound of a hidden lock turning, one they didn't even know existed. A lock that was about to close behind them for good. They thought they were taking my home. They had no clue I was about to dismantle their entire world. The guest room wasn't much more than a closet with a bed jammed inside, a space meant for someone who wasn't expected to stay long. I reached up to the top of the wardrobe and pulled down my old suitcase, the leather one scuffed from years of road trips with Linda. Its brass clasps snapped open with a metallic click, a sound that belonged to another, better time. Packing didn't take long. After 68 years of living, you understand that most possessions are just excess weight. What really matters can usually fit in one bag. I started with clothes: 2 pairs of broken-in jeans, flannel shirts worn thin at the elbows, wool, socks for the chillier nights I knew were ahead. I ignored the suits hanging in the back. Those belonged to a man who once sat through corporate dinners, smiled at company award banquets, and believed his presence still held value in his family's lives. That man didn't exist anymore. My hands lingered over a cedar box tucked in the back of a drawer. I lifted the lid, and the faint scent of aged wood filled the room. Inside lay a photograph. Linda, standing in the backyard beneath the mango tree we had planted together, her hair catching the ocean breeze, laughing at some joke I'd long forgotten. Her smile was still the truest thing I'd ever known. I brushed a thin layer of dust from the frame and placed the picture carefully on top of my folded shirts. She would ride with me, face to the sky. Next, I packed my tools, not the heavy ones. From the garage, just the small, essential set. My father's hand plane, its wooden body worn smooth by his hands, and then by mine. I remembered using that same hand plane years ago to shave the bottom of Daniel's bedroom door when he was 7, after he insisted on a thick blue rug that jammed it shut. He'd stood there, watching me with wide eyes, his little hand resting gently on my shoulder. "You can fix anything, Dad," he'd whispered. I guess this brokenness between us was something I couldn't fix. I left the flashy watch Daniel and Rebecca had given me last Christmas on the dresser. Heavy, gaudy, and cold against my skin, it had never felt like mine. Instead, I reached for Linda's old reading glasses, still tucked inside their cracked leather case on the nightstand. They were no use to me now. My prescription was far stronger. But just holding them, I could almost see her again, sitting in her favorite chair, peering over the rims at me with that soft, questioning look in her eyes. I slipped the case carefully into the side pocket of my suitcase. I zipped the bag shut. The sound was final. I walked through the house one last time. The blinding white paint in the living room felt sterile, like a showroom display. The sleek modern couch looked more like a prop than a place where a family once laughed together. This wasn't my home anymore. It was just a house, a shell they had already claimed. I didn't glance back as I pulled the door closed behind me. The lock clicked with a soft, decisive thud. Next door, old Joe Ramirez lived in a house that was the complete opposite of mine, cluttered, warm, smelling of fried plantains, motor oil, and a life that wasn't trying to impress anyone. Before I could knock, the door swung open. Joe stood there, a wrench in his hand, worry lines deepening across his weathered face. "Mark," he said, his eyes flicking down to the suitcase in my grip. "What did those buzzards pull this time?" There was no need for masks with Joe. We'd been friends for more than 3 decades. He'd helped me build the backyard deck that Daniel and Rebecca had just used to lecture me about expenses. "They're charging me rent," I said. Joe muttered a curse under his breath. Short and sharp, more punctuation than profanity. He stepped aside, holding the door open. "Spare room's yours, however long you need it. Maria just put fresh sheets on the bed yesterday." Maria, his wife of 40 years, had a way of turning kindness into an everyday habit. I stepped inside and set my bag down in their hallway. The crushing weight that had sat on my chest for 2 long years, heavy and suffocating, lifted just enough for me to finally take a full breath. I wasn't alone, and a man who isn't alone isn't defeated. He's only regrouping. Joe's kitchen was a sanctuary of beautiful disorder. Tools that had no business being in a kitchen, pliers, tape measures, sat on a shelf beside jars of homemade pickles. The air buzzed with the steady hum of an ancient refrigerator that had probably survived 3 presidents. He poured me a cup of his no-nonsense Cuban coffee and slid it across the scarred wooden table. Then he sat down across from me. Joe didn't push me for details. He just let the silence stretch, the kind of silence that has weight. After a while, he set his mug down with a soft thud against the scarred table. "You know, Mark," he began, his voice low, almost reluctant. "There's something that's been eating at me all week. Didn't want to mention it before. Figured. It wasn't my place. But now..." His eyes drifted toward the window, focusing on something only he seemed to see. "What is it, Joe?" I asked, my own voice sounding thinner than I'd like. He turned back to me, his gaze sharp behind his smudged glasses. "Tuesday morning, about 10. I was in the backyard tuning up my mower. Saw a car pull up in front of your place. Brand new. Lexus. The kind that costs more than it should and knows it." He took a long sip of coffee before continuing. "Guy steps out, wearing a suit, clipboard in hand. Logo on the side of his car read, Miami Coastal Property Assessments." The name hit me like a hammer. An appraiser. The warmth drained from my fingers, and the coffee mug suddenly felt heavy, almost foreign in my hand. But Joe wasn't done. "Here's the kicker, Mark. He wasn't alone. Your boy Daniel walked right out the front door to meet him, saw it clear as day. Daniel was the one doing all the talking, pointing at the roofline, pacing the property like he already owned it. They were out there at least half an hour. Looked official. And just like that, everything snapped into focus. The carefully crafted spreadsheet, the sudden demand for rent, the unified, rehearsed way Daniel and Rebecca had backed each other up. This hadn't been some spur-of-the-moment blow-up. It was deliberate, a scheme, built piece by piece. The rent wasn't the goal. It was the setup, the excuse. The first step to make me look unreasonable, to make whatever came next appear justified. I set my mug down hard against the table, the ceramic striking the wood with a sharp crack. The hurt I'd felt just an hour earlier burned away, leaving something colder in its place. It was a feeling I knew well. The feeling I used to get on a construction site when the sky went dark and the wind shifted, the calm before a storm. The clarity, the certainty that something had to be done to keep the whole structure from collapsing. "They're not trying to squeeze rent out of me, Joe," I said, my voice low, dangerous. They're trying to build a case to get me out. For good. Joe's jaw clenched, his eyes going hard. The hell they will, he muttered. Not from Linda's house, not while I'm still breathing next door. I looked at my oldest friend, at the unwavering loyalty burning in his eyes. Then I glanced down at my own hands resting on the table. They weren't trembling anymore. They were perfectly still. No, Joe, I said. They won't. This wasn't just a reaction anymore. It was a foundation, and on it, I was about to build my own fortress. I left Joe's house with his words still echoing in my head, the phrase, "looked official," looping over and over. It's one thing to be blindsided by an angry outburst. It's something else, entirely to realize you're the mark in a slow, calculated scheme. I walked back to my house, and let myself in through the front door. It was silent. The scent of Rebecca's perfume hung faintly in the hallway. An unwelcome ghost. They were gone for the afternoon, probably out celebrating, convinced their performance had worked. In the study, I opened the desk drawer and pulled out my old wallet. The leather was worn soft at the folds, like cloth. Tucked into a back sleeve, behind a faded snapshot of Linda from our honeymoon, was a business card. I hadn't needed it in years, but I always knew it was there. David Chen, attorney at law, estate and property. As my finger hovered over the numbers on my phone, a memory hit me, sharp, vivid, like it had been waiting for this exact moment. We were in David's office, a decade ago. The chairs were too firm, the air thick with the serious smell of paper and old leather. I'd been restless, grumbling about the cost. "Linda, we're healthy," I'd said. "We have time. This feels morbid." Linda had only shaken her head, her gaze steady. She placed her hand over mine on the polished mahogany table. "Paper is more honest than memory, Mark," she'd said softly but firmly. "And it's more stubborn than feelings. We're not doing this because we think tomorrow is our last day. We're doing it to protect the life we've built." She'd looked straight at me then, and her next words had landed like a prophecy. "You protect what's yours on paper so you never have to fight for it with your heart." Linda's voice faded as the line clicked on the other end. Law offices of David Chen. "Hello," I said, my voice sounding steadier than I felt. "This is Mark Rivera. I'm an old client, Linda Rivera's husband. I need to speak with Mr. Chen." David picked up with, he listened in silence. When I finished, there was only the faint sound of his pen tapping rhythmically on a notepad. "Mark," he said at last, "I've just pulled up the Miami-Dade property records. According to the survivorship clause on your original purchase, the deed transferred solely to you upon Linda's passing. The mortgage was satisfied and released back in 2010. The house is yours, free and clear. Your son has as much legal right to demand rent from you as your mail carrier does." Relief flooded me, so strong I had to steady myself against the desk. "So, they can't force me out?" "Legally? Not a chance," David said. His tone sharpened. "But that's not their play, is it? This isn't about the law. It's about attrition. They're trying to wear you down, make life so unbearable you'll hand over the keys just to buy yourself some peace. They want you to believe you're a burden. That's how they get control." "I don't want to fight, David," I said quietly. "I don't want to end up across a courtroom from my own son." "I know," he said. "Linda told me once that you'd rather build a bridge than set one on fire, even if the person on the other side is holding a gas can. So we won't fight. We'll correct, quietly, quickly, and in a way they'll never see coming." I leaned forward, resting my elbow on the desk. "How?" "First we sell the house," David said, his words clipped and clean. "But not the usual way. No sign in the yard, no listings online. This is called a pocket listing. I have an agent, Maria Garcia. She's invisible. Works only with a private list of qualified cash buyers hunting for off-market properties in Miami. She can have that house shown, inspected, and sold before Daniel even notices the neighbor's dog barking at a different car. Sold. The word landed like a shockwave, but also like relief. But the money, I started. They'll see it in my accounts. They'll come for it. That, David said, and I could hear the faint smile in his voice, is the second part of the plan. We're going to set up an irrevocable trust. We'll call it the Linda Rivera Trust. The proceeds from the sale, all $900,000, will go directly into that trust. You'll be the sole lifetime beneficiary, which means you can draw an income to live on. But the money itself belongs to the trust, not to you. It's a separate legal entity, untouchable in any lawsuit, untouchable by family. A fortress, the kind Linda wanted you to have, the Linda Rivera Trust. He had used her name. The plan wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about honoring her legacy, about protecting the life she had envisioned, the life they were trying to dismantle one spreadsheet at a time. I could finally breathe. The path ahead was no longer a dark tangle of uncertainty. It was a straight, clean line. What do I need to do, I asked. For now? Nothing, David said. Let them think they're winning. Let them feel comfortable. I'll contact Maria. I'll draft the trust documents. You just keep being the quiet, compliant father they think you are. The less you resist, the less they'll watch. And when they finally turn around, the house they think is theirs will belong to someone else entirely. The coffee shop was on the far side of town, small and anonymous, with mismatched chairs and the quiet hum of people who weren't there to be noticed. It was the kind of place Linda would have called honest. I arrived 15 minutes early, a habit ingrained from years on construction sites where punctuality meant you were already late. I picked a small table in the back corner, giving me a clear view of the door while remaining out of the main flow of traffic. I ordered a black coffee and let it sit, steam rising in the cool morning air. She arrived at precisely 10 o'clock. Maria Garcia didn't look like the high-powered real estate agents you see in glossy magazines. No flashy blazer, no oversized designer bag. She wore a simple dark pantsuit, efficient, unassuming, a professional who let results speak louder than appearances. Her hair was pulled back into a neat, no-nonsense bun, and she carried a single slim tablet. She scanned the room quickly, eyes sharp and calculating, before walking straight to my table. "Mr. Rivera," she said, extending her hand. Her handshake was firm, her voice calm and controlled. "Mark," I corrected, "and thank you for coming." She took the seat across from me and set her tablet on the table, but didn't open it. Her gaze locked with mine, the kind of look that made you feel every word mattered. "David Chen explained the situation," she said, lowering her voice slightly. "He stressed the need for two things, speed and discretion. Those are my specialties." I nodded, taking a slow sip of my now lukewarm coffee. "He mentioned you had a different approach." "I do," she confirmed. "Here's how we're going to handle this, Mark. A pocket listing, an off-market sale. No for sale sign in the yard. Nothing on Zillow, nothing on the public MLS. To everyone outside, your house doesn't exist." She paused, letting the words settle. "I work with a private network of buyers, relocating doctors from the new Miami hospital, tech executives, moving from California, people willing to pay a premium to avoid the chaos of a public bidding war. They value privacy. They trust me to bring them properties before the rest of the world even knows they're available. I already have a young couple in mind for your home. They've been hunting in your neighborhood for 6 months and keep getting outbid." I leaned forward, hands wrapped around my coffee mug. "How do you manage a showing without them knowing?" Maria's expression didn't change. "David told me your son and his wife are usually out on weekday afternoons. One private showing. That's it. I'll tell the buyers it's a one-time opportunity. We'll be in and out in under an hour. They all sign strict non-disclosure agreements before I even give them the address. My reputation depends on discretion. Mark, one leak and my entire network vanishes. The plan was surgical, precise, exactly what I needed. A strategy built on the same principles I'd lived by my whole life. Measure twice, cut once, no wasted motion, no unnecessary noise. Okay, I said. The word landed solid, like a foundation stone settling into place. A small professional. Smile touched her lips. She finally opened her tablet, turned the screen toward me, and brought up a listing agreement. Then let's make it official, she said. I'll make the first call as soon as we're done here. From now on, you just keep being the quiet man in the guest room. I'll handle everything else. I was sitting on Joe's back porch, nursing a cup of coffee, watching the bright cardinals argue over the bird feeder, when my phone buzzed. Daniel's name flashed on the screen and my stomach tightened. I let it ring twice, took a deep breath, and forced my voice into the defeated tone he and Rebecca expected. Hello? Dad? His voice was syrupy sweet, the same tone he hadn't used since he was a kid asking for permission to stay out past curfew. Hi, just thinking about you. Hope you're doing okay. I stared at the peeling paint on Joe's porch railing. I'm managing, Daniel. Well, I found something that might be more than just managing, he said, artificial cheer dripping from every word. It's this amazing place, Bayview Estates. Not what you'd expect, Dad, more like a resort. They have a 9-hole golf course, a heated pool, and even a bistro with happy hour specials. I said nothing. I let him paint the picture of a gilded cage. I know you said you'd be out by the end of the week, and Rebecca and I just don't want you stressing over finding a place. It's overwhelming. So, I booked a private tour for us on Saturday, just to look. No pressure. Of course. But it's a chance to see what's out there. Saturday. 4 days away, the exact same day Maria planned her private showing. They weren't just pushing me out, they were already drawing up my next prison, using my own well-being as the blueprint. Daniel, that's very sudden, I said, forcing a weary tone. I know, Dad, but these places have waiting lists. A corner unit just opened, and I didn't want you to miss the chance. He paused, then delivered the polished lie like a master actor. We just want to make sure you're safe and comfortable. We love you. The call ended. I set the phone down on the small metal table next to my chair. The sun was warm, the cardinals still squabbling, and the world kept turning. But his voice lingered, cloying and sweet, sticking to everything. They weren't giving me a week. They were giving me an ultimatum wrapped in a brochure. The timeline wasn't mine anymore. It was theirs, and I knew, with a certainty that sent a chill through my spine, that if I didn't act fast, my next home wouldn't be one I chose. It would be a corner unit with a view of a golf course I'd never play. The truck smelled of old motor oil and Joe's steady, unflinching friendship. I slouched in the passenger seat, parked 3 houses down from mine, engine off. My view was partially blocked by the neighbor's overgrown hibiscus hedge, but I could see the curb in front of my house, the same curb I had poured myself 25 years ago. My heart pounded like a frantic drum. Every nerve felt live, exposed. My entire future rested on the next 45 minutes. In the front yard, or what had been mine, Joe was methodically raking leaves into a neat pile. He wore his grease-stained overalls and wide-brimmed hat, the perfect picture of a retiree, with nothing urgent to do on a Thursday afternoon. Yet his posture was alert, movements deliberate. He was my lookout, my only line of defense if Daniel or Rebecca decided to return early from their important lives. We had a system. If a car turned onto the street, Joe would lift his hat and wipe his brow. If it was theirs, he would drop the rake. A simple, silent language men build over decades of shared projects and trust. At exactly 2 o'clock, a dark gray Volvo sedan, the quiet, expensive kind, pulled up to the curb. My breath caught. Maria Garcia stepped out of the driver's side, calm as if she were arriving for tea. She smoothed the front of her blazer and waited. The passenger doors opened and the buyers emerged. Dr. Eris Thorne was tall and lean, his face thoughtful and kind. His wife, Dr. Lena Thorne, had a warm smile that reached her eyes even from this distance. They didn't look like sharks. They looked like people you'd want living in your home. The kind who would appreciate how the morning sun hit the kitchen window. That thought, oddly enough, made my anxiety spike. I watched Maria lead them up the walkway I had laid, brick by brick, with Linda 2 decades ago. She unlocked the front door with the key I had entrusted to her and ushered them inside. And then, they disappeared. The house swallowed them whole. All I could do was sit, wait, and trust. Minutes stretched like hours. I imagined them walking through the rooms, picturing Lena running her hand over the built-in cherry bookshelves I had crafted for Linda as a birthday surprise. Linda had cried when she first saw them, her hand flying to her mouth. "Mark," she had whispered, "it's the most beautiful thing anyone has ever made for me." I wondered if the Thornes could feel the love still in the grain of that wood. I pictured Eris in the kitchen, noting the solid oak. Cabinets with their dovetail joints, a detail no modern builder would bother with. I had spent an entire winter perfecting those cabinets, old radio tunes filling the air while Linda read the newspaper aloud to me. They weren't just cabinets, they were a testament to a life built with care and patience. A life my own son now saw as nothing more than a line item on a spreadsheet. I glanced toward Joe. He was still raking, rhythm slow and steady. No hat wipe, no dropped rake. We were still safe. Through the large living room window, I saw them standing by the fireplace, eyes on the mantel I had carved from a single piece of reclaimed timber. Lena pointed at something, and Eris nodded, serious and appreciative. They weren't just evaluating square footage. They were noticing the details, the work. They were seeing me in a way my own family no longer could. The wait was agonizing. My palms were slick with sweat, my morning coffee a sour memory in my stomach. What if they hated it? What if the scuffs on the floorboards were seen as flaws instead of history? What if they walked out and the entire plan collapsed? Then, after what felt like an eternity, the front door opened. 48 minutes. I had been counting. Maria emerged first, followed by the Thornes. They lingered on the porch, talking. I couldn't hear their words, and the not knowing was its own kind of torture. I watched their body language looking for a sign. They weren't smiling, but they weren't frowning either. They looked serious, engaged. After a few moments, they shook Maria's hand, returned to their Volvo, and drove off. The street was quiet again. Maria lingered on the porch for a heartbeat. Back to me. She pulled out her phone. My own phone, sitting beside me on the seat, felt like a ticking bomb. I stared at it, waiting for the buzz, for the verdict. It vibrated, deafening in the small cab of the truck. My thumb shook as I answered the call. "Mark?" Maria's voice was calm as ever, but there was a new energy in it, a tightly coiled excitement. "Maria," I rasped, my voice dry and hoarse. "They loved it, Mark," she said, and I finally exhaled. Lena went on and on about the bookshelves. Eris asked me 3 times if the mantel was original. They see the quality. They feel the history. I closed my eyes, pressing my forehead against the cool glass of the truck window. "Did they make an offer?" A pause hung in the air, a perfectly timed beat of theater. "Mark," she said, the smile audible now, "they don't want a bidding war. They made an all-cash offer, $940,000, and they're willing to waive the inspection and close in 10 days. The number hit me like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. $940,000. It wasn't just a figure, it was a key, an escape hatch. The sound of a fortress gate slamming shut behind me, locking their greed out in the cold. I couldn't speak. I leaned my head back against the seat, letting the relief wash over me in a cleansing tide. Across the street, Joe caught my eye and lifted his rake in a small, silent salute. The game had shifted. All the pieces were in place. All that remained was the final, quiet checkmate. I held the phone to my ear, the plastic warm against my skin. $940,000. It wasn't just money. It was a lifetime of early mornings and sore muscles. It was the 2 jobs I worked when Daniel was in braces. The vacations Linda and I skipped to pay off the mortgage early. Every quiet sacrifice, every unspoken worry condensed into one clean, undeniable figure. It was freedom. The price of the fortress Linda had always wanted me to have, a fortress they tried to turn into their personal bank. Maria's voice pulled me back. "Mark, are you there? No pressure. We can counter if you'd like." "No," I said. The word came out stronger and clearer than anything I'd spoken in years. No hesitation, no doubt. The path forward was straight and unbroken. Finally, I was ready to walk it. "No, Maria, don't counter. Tell them yes. We accept the offer." "Excellent," she said, her tone crisp with professional satisfaction. "I'll draft the purchase agreement immediately. With a cash offer and no contingencies, the 10-day close will be tight, but absolutely achievable. I'll have the initial documents ready for your signature in the morning." "Thank you, Maria," I said, and I meant it. Not just for the work, but for being the steady, competent hand I needed while my own world trembled. After we hung up, I didn't move. I sat in the quiet cab of Joe's truck, the engine off, staring at the house. My house. For a few more days, at least. The late Miami sun caught the roofline just so, making it glow. It wasn't a prison or a battleground anymore. It was my last and greatest tool. The key to my future. I started the truck, the old engine rumbling to life. Pulling away from the curb, I felt a deep, satisfying finality. The wheels were turning. The plan was in motion. There was no turning back, and for the first time in a very long time, I didn't want to. I was driving toward a future they couldn't touch, financed by a past they tried to erase. The day after signing the papers with Maria was Tuesday. Daniel was at his gallery, and Rebecca had a networking lunch scheduled downtown that, according to her digital calendar, would last until at least 5. The house was silent. The perfect window. Joe pulled his old Ford pickup into my driveway precisely at 1 o'clock, backing it right up to the garage. No honking, no need. I was already waiting, first box in hand. We worked in a quiet, precise rhythm, honed by decades of knowing how a man moves when he needs a hand and when he needs to bear the weight alone. These weren't random boxes from the attic. They held the soul of the house. The pieces I couldn't let them touch, sell, or discard. The first box was heavy with photo albums. As I handed it to Joe, the lid shifted, and a corner of an old photograph peeked out. It was Linda, 20 years younger, standing by the lake with a 7-year-old Daniel on her shoulders. He was laughing, tiny hands tangled in his mother's hair. Daniel was looking up at him, his small face lit with a kind of pure, unguarded joy that now hit me like a punch to the chest. It was a photograph of a family that no longer existed, a family they had dismantled, one careless decision at a time. "You all right, Tony?" Joe asked, his voice soft, steady. I just nodded, unable to speak, and pushed the first box into his waiting hands. Next came Linda's gardening things from the shed, her favorite trowel, the handle worn smooth and dark from her grip. Her old canvas gloves, stiff with dried soil from the hibiscus and bougainvillea she had loved so much. I remembered her out there humming softly, talking to the plants as if they were old friends. "You have to get your hands dirty to make anything beautiful grow, Tony," she used to say, wiping a smudge of dirt on her cheek. I felt a lump in my throat. I was getting my hands dirty now, Linda. Doing it to protect the beautiful thing we had grown together. The heaviest came last. The old cedar chest from the foot of our bed, the one her grandfather had made. Joe and I carried it carefully, our footsteps echoing in the now emptier master bedroom. Inside lay her wedding dress, wrapped meticulously in tissue, and a bundle of letters we had written during the 1 year I had to work out of state. "This is for the things too important to forget," she had told me the day we bought it. As we loaded the chest onto the truck, I glanced back at the house. It felt hollow now, a beautiful shell with the life already gone. This wasn't just moving objects. It was a rescue mission. I was saving the last pieces of our life together from a future where they would be nothing more than props in Daniel and Rebecca's perfectly curated empty world. "That's the last of it," I said to Joe, closing the tailgate with a quiet click. He put a heavy hand on my shoulder. "She'd be proud of you, Tony, for doing this." "I'm not just moving boxes, Joe," I said, my voice thick. "I'm moving a life, our life, and I'm not going to let them sell it for spare parts." The metal door of the storage unit rolled down with a loud final clang. In that sound, I felt a chapter of my life close forever. The past was secure. The stage was set for what came next. The quiet of Joe's spare room was a welcome change. For the first time in 2 years, the only sounds were the ones that belonged there, the gentle hum of the ceiling fan, the distant bark of a neighborhood dog. The work of moving the boxes, of securing the tangible pieces of my life with Linda, had left me drained, but it also felt strangely purifying. With the past safely tucked away in a climate-controlled storage unit, I could finally turn my attention to the future. That evening, I sat on the edge of the firm, modest bed in Joe's spare room and opened my briefcase. It was time to go through the papers I had saved, the loose ends of a life I was preparing to tie up neatly. Most of it was mundane, old tax returns, car titles, bills, necessary but forgettable. At the bottom of a file labeled Household, though, I found a thin, overlooked folder. The label, written in Linda's elegant hand years ago, read simply, "Emergency Card." I had nearly forgotten it existed. Years ago, when Daniel first went to college, we had opened a joint credit card for him. It wasn't for shopping or fun. It was strictly for true emergencies. A flat tire on a long drive home, a medical copay he couldn't cover. We had told him it was to be used only if he was genuinely stuck. I hadn't seen a bill in over a decade and assumed he had closed it when he got married. But inside the folder was a single unopened envelope from the credit card company delivered to the house last month by mistake. Curiosity tugged at me as I slid my finger under the flap. I expected to see a zero balance, a dormant account. Instead, the number at the bottom of the page made my chest tighten. $12,000. I scanned the charges, and a cold, sickening weight settled in my stomach. This wasn't a record of emergencies. It was a ledger of their life, a life I had been unknowingly funding. $450 at some trendy Miami bistro, $800 at a boutique I had never heard of, $600 for a 2-night stay at a resort called Ocean Serenity. There were dozens more. Uber rides, artisanal coffee shops, monthly streaming subscriptions I didn't recognize. My hands shook as I rifled through the other statements, going back years. The pattern was clear and damning. This wasn't a recent indulgence, it was a calculated long-term misuse. They had been treating this emergency card as their private slush fund for years. I thought back to 6 months ago when Daniel had sat at my kitchen table, eyes wide, telling me they were barely scraping by and needed help with a car repair. A few $100s, he'd said, it would wipe them out. I felt the betrayal like a punch to my chest. I had gone to the bank the next day and pulled $500 from my own savings to help her. I looked at the statement again. Just 2 days after that supposed plea for help, there it was, a charge for $375 at Serenity Spa. The betrayal hit like ice in my chest. This wasn't just about the house. This wasn't simply entitlement. This was theft. They had looked me in the eye, begged for aid, and accepted it, all while treating my name and my credit as their personal, limitless resource. Their demands for rent, their claims of helping with expenses. It had all been a carefully constructed lie, a story to cover their parasitic greed. The sadness I'd carried for days burned away, replaced by a hard, unyielding anger. Everything had changed. This wasn't a family dispute anymore. This was fraud. I laid the statements across the bed, my hands steady now. I picked up my phone and, with the precision of a carpenter marking a cut, photographed each page. I opened my email, attached the images, and sent them to David Chen. The subject line was simple: additional documentation. The body of the email contained only one sentence. David, it seems the problem is bigger than we thought. Hitting send felt like the first shot fired in a battle I never wanted, but one I now knew I was going to win. I didn't wait for David to respond. Some actions can't be delegated to a lawyer, not because of the law, but because of the soul. They must be done by your own hand, in your own voice. I picked up the most recent credit card statement, the paper slick beneath my fingers, and dialed the number on the back. The automated menu greeted me, polite, robotic, a system designed to wear down anyone before they reached a human. I pressed 0 repeatedly, a small act of defiance, until it relented and a voice finally answered. Thank you for calling. My name is Brenda. How can I help you? Hello, Brenda, I said, keeping my voice calm and deliberate. My name is Frank Miller. I need to report a series of unauthorized charges on my account and place an immediate freeze on all cards. Associated with it, there was a pause, the sound of typing echoing softly. Okay, Mr. Miller, can you verify your address and the last 4 digits of your social security number for me? I gave her the information. Thank you, Brenda said. Now, can you tell me the date and amount of the last charge you believe to be fraudulent? I glanced down at the statement, at the endless parade of indulgences, and a bitter laugh almost escaped me. Brenda, I said, my voice low and steady. The last authorized charge on this account was for a college textbook for my daughter, fall 2010. Every single transaction since then has been fraudulent. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and this time it felt human, not procedural. I could hear her take a small, sharp breath. I see, sir, she said, her professional tone now tinged with something else. Pity, maybe, or just sheer surprise. I am placing an immediate freeze on the account. The secondary cardholder, a Jessica Miller, will no longer have access. The account is locked. Thank you, I said, and ended the call. I had just cut one of their lifelines, a quiet, invisible act of rebellion. They wouldn't notice until the next time Jessica tried to buy a $5 latte and was met with the cold, hard wall of a decline. I stood and walked to the window of Sam's spare room. My old house was next door, the kitchen lights blazing, probably where they were deciding on dinner. My gaze drifted to the calendar on Sam's wall. Today was Wednesday. Maria would file the final sale paperwork tomorrow. The closing was scheduled for Monday morning. The new owners, the Thorns, would take legal possession on Tuesday at 9 a.m., sharp at 6 days. In 6 days, their world, the one they had built on my foundation, my credit, my silence, would vanish. They were in there right now, laughing, making plans, completely oblivious that they were living on borrowed time in a house already sold. The trap was set. Every piece was perfectly in place. All that remained was for them to walk straight into it. The title company's office was on the 7th floor of a downtown building, the conference room designed to absorb emotion. Neutral beige walls, a polished, unforgiving slab of dark wood for a table. The only art was a framed abstract print, a storm at sea. Fitting. I sat on one side with David Chen. On the other sat Dr. Aris and Dr. Lena Thorne, the people who would inherit my life's work. At the head of the table sat Susan, the closing agent, polite and efficient, with a thick stack of documents squared perfectly before her. The air in the conference room was still, filled with that reverent hush that seems to precede the signing of life-altering papers. Susan guided us through the final documents with a calm, practiced cadence. The HUD statement, the deed, the tax forms, a litany of numbers and clauses, a legal map for the change that was about to take place. My ears heard the words, but my mind wandered. I thought of Carol, of the day we signed the first papers for that house, our hands trembling slightly, our hearts brimming with hope for a future we thought we could control. When my turn came, Susan slid the final signature page across the polished table. "Right here, Mr. Miller," she said, pointing to the line. I picked up the pen. It felt unexpectedly heavy, heavier than any hammer I'd ever swung. This was the final, irreversible step, the point of no return. My hand didn't waver. As I wrote Frank Miller, the ink was dark, decisive, a signature that wasn't frail or uncertain. It was the signature of a man who knew exactly what he was doing. Dr. Thorne signed next, steady and assured. We exchanged a brief nod across the table, a quiet acknowledgement of mutual respect. He didn't know the full story, but I saw in his eyes a recognition of care, of quality, of the labor and love embedded in a home built to last. Susan placed the notary stamp down with a solid, satisfying thud. The sound echoed in the quiet room. It was done. Not with shouting, not with conflict, but with the quiet authority of ink meeting paper. The fortress Carol and I had built no longer belonged to me, yet as I stood, a weight I hadn't realized I'd carried lifted from my shoulders. For the first time in years, I felt safe. I shook Dr. Thorne's hand. "Take good care of it," I said. "We will, Frank," he replied, firm and sincere. Outside, Monday morning was bright, and the city felt different. Cleaner air, wider sky. The papers were signed, the funds transferred, the house had a new family, and all that remained was to inform the old one. Later, over a pot of his brutally strong coffee, Sam described the scene for me, his words precise and measured, like the hum of a well-tuned engine. He knew which sounds meant everything was working, and which meant everything was about to break. Tom's laughter faltered, replaced by a flicker of panic. He glanced at Jessica, then back at Ms. Jenkins and the deputy. Wait a minute. You're saying we have to leave?" "Yes, sir," Ms. Jenkins replied evenly, her tone leaving no room for argument. "You have 30 days to vacate. The property is under new ownership. Any questions regarding the sale or the closing should be directed to the title company, but the notice itself is legally binding." Jessica's hands tightened around the coffee mug until the porcelain creaked. Her voice, once so confident and commanding, came out a strained whisper. "But, Dad, he didn't tell us. He wouldn't—" The deputy, silent until now, cleared his throat. "Ma'am, we're simply here to ensure the notice is delivered. Any further disputes are civil matters, but for today, this is the action required." Sam, standing just behind the screen door, let out a quiet chuckle under his breath. I could see the corner of his mouth lift, the satisfaction of a plan executed with perfect timing. Jessica's gaze snapped to Sam's house, to the familiar porch where I had been sitting just hours ago. Her eyes narrowed, recognition dawning too late. She had underestimated every quiet move I had made, every calculated step I had taken to secure the life and legacy she tried to claim as her own. Tom, face flushed, finally turned to the paper in Ms. Jenkins' hand. His eyes scanned it frantically, the reality sinking in with every line. The official seal, the deed recorded, the date, the signatures. There was no loophole, no bargaining chip, no last-minute reprieve. The fortress was closed. Jessica's lips trembled. But we've lived here. It's our home. The words fell flat, hollow against the immovable authority of ink and law. Sam straightened, his posture calm, unwavering. The blue sky stretched endlessly above them, bright and indifferent, a perfect witness to the quiet triumph unfolding below. Ms. Jenkins folded the portfolio, her movements precise and professional. You have 30 days to vacate. After that, the property belongs fully to the new owners. Thank you for your cooperation. Without another word, she turned, the deputy following. They walked down the path, steps deliberate and unhurried, leaving Jessica and Tom on the porch with nothing but the echo of authority and inevitability. Inside, Jessica sank to the couch, her coffee mug now abandoned on the table, the warmth of entitlement replaced by a chilling realization. Tom ran a hand through his hair, muttering under his breath, trying to make sense of a reality he hadn't anticipated. And somewhere just down the street, I let myself finally exhale. The game was over, and I had won. Not with anger, not with confrontation, but with patience, precision, and the quiet power of a life protected. "Hello?" I said, my voice calm, steady, deliberate. "Dad, this isn't fair." Jessica's voice was sharp, trembling, full of outrage and disbelief. "You can't do this to us. This house?" "I already did, Jess," I interrupted softly, letting the finality settle like a stone dropped in still water. "It's no longer ours. It belongs to the people who will appreciate it, who will care for it. You have 30 days to make your arrangements." There was a long pause, her breaths sharp and uneven. But we thought—" "You thought wrong," I said gently but firmly. "You mistook my patience for weakness, my silence for compliance. Every move I made was measured, every step deliberate. You've had every advantage, every opportunity. This was the final act of fairness." Tears, I realized, were now in her voice. But I didn't falter. I let the silence stretch, letting her realize the truth for herself. "Jess, Tom, I hope you'll find a way to move forward. I hope you'll understand one day why this had to happen. For now, you have 30 days, that's it." I hung up before she could argue further, letting the quiet settle over the phone line, over the room, over the past 2 years of tension and deceit. Outside, the sun was still warm on Sam's porch. The hummingbird flitted from feeder to feeder, unaware of human drama. I leaned back, letting the chair rock gently beneath me, the weight in my chest finally easing. The fortress was gone, yes, but what it had protected, the life Carol and I built together, was intact. And for the first time in years, I could breathe freely, unafraid, unmanipulated, and finally at peace. The war had been won not with anger, not with shouting, but with quiet patience, careful planning, and the unshakable resolve of a life lived on principle. And in that quiet victory, I felt the last true echo of Carol's presence. Strong, deliberate, and always unmistakably mine. "I've already covered my bases," I continued, letting each word land deliberately, like hammer strikes. "The deed is recorded. The closing was legal, final, and binding. I was represented by counsel. I was of sound mind. You've already lost. Every claim you're planning is meaningless." There was a pause on the line, heavy and stunned. I could almost hear the words they hadn't yet formed, the disbelief, battling with the dawning reality. This can't be real," Jessica whispered, trembling now, the anger bleeding into helplessness. "It is real," I said, my voice steady, almost gentle. And it's exactly what had to happen. You built your life on my patience, on my silence, on my willingness to give you the benefit of the doubt. I gave you all of that. And you took it and turned it into entitlement, lies, and theft. This is simply the natural consequence, Tom scoffed, trying to regain control. You think you're so clever. You think you're some kind of hero. No, Tom, I said, letting the words hang. I'm a man who finally stopped being a victim of his own family. I honored the life I built with Carol. I protected it. That's all. The line was quiet again. My calm contrasted with their unraveling. I could feel the finality settling around me like a shield. My house, my history, my memories. They were safe. Their threats had no power. Their panic was meaningless. I ended the call and set the phone down. Outside, Sam's yard was calm, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the lawn. The hummingbird had returned, flitting from flower to flower, oblivious to human drama. I leaned back, finally letting the tension seep out of my shoulders. For the first time in years, I felt the quiet satisfaction of a plan executed perfectly. Justice, not revenge, not rage, had been done. And in that calm, deliberate victory, I could finally breathe. My home, my life, and Carol's legacy were untouchable. The fortress stood, and nothing, not greed, not lies, not entitlement, could breach it. The war was over, and for the first time in decades I was free. And when you do, I continued, my attorney David Chen will be more than happy to present the court with a few exhibits. First, the results of my recent mental capacity evaluation passed, with flying colors. And second, I let the pause stretch, a perfect echoing space. She'll produce 15 years of bank statements from our little rainy day account. She's especially fascinated by the charges from Elysian. Retreat, Marcus. They line up almost exactly with the times Claire was calling me in tears about how you two couldn't afford a new transmission. The legal term for that, I believe, is fraud. The silence on the line was absolute, like a man who'd just walked headlong into a brick wall he didn't know existed. A strangled, muffled sound reached me. Then Claire came back on the phone. Her voice completely different now. The rage, the panic, all gone. What remained was a thin, trembling whisper. Dad, please. It was far too late for please. The time for please had been when she'd been laughing at my expense, when she'd been quietly arranging my exile, when she'd been standing over me while I fought for my dignity. It's done, Claire, I said, my voice stripped of any warmth. It was the tone of a judge pronouncing a final verdict. You wanted me out of your life. You got your wish. As for your new housing situation, I believe the new owners will be expecting the rent. You've got 72 hours before they change the locks. I didn't wait for a reply. I ended the call with a quiet, deliberate tap of my finger on the screen. The connection was gone. And in the deep, ringing silence that followed, I finally, truly felt free. I didn't see what happened next with my own eyes. Aaron filled me in later. He didn't take any pleasure in the telling. He said he lingered on his stoop just long enough to see the first cracks appear, then decided his rose bushes suddenly needed a lot of attention. He told me that after the call ended, Claire stood in the doorway for a long time, phone still pressed to her ear as if the dial tone contained the rest of her future. Her face, he said, was a blank mask of shock. Marcus was the first to move. He yanked the eviction notice from her hand and read it again, as if the words might rearrange themselves into something less damning. This is a bluff, Marcus said, his voice a low growl. He's trying to scare us. Claire finally lowered the phone, her hand shaking. A single sharp, hysterical laugh escaped her lips. A bluff, Marcus. Did you hear him? The bank account, he knows about the bank account. That was when the blame started, a bitter, venomous torrent. This was your brilliant plan, Priya hissed, her voice a raw whisper that was somehow louder than her earlier screams. You said he was a weak, sentimental old man. You said he would fold as soon as we applied a little pressure." "Me?" Tom shot back, his own face pale. "You were the one who couldn't wait. You had to have the house now. Had to have the money now. I told you to go slow, but you just had to push him." "Because we're drowning, you idiot," she cried, finally throwing the phone onto the entryway table. "Because your ventures are bleeding us dry. The house was supposed to be the safety net." "We'll find a lawyer," Tom blustered. But the confidence had evaporated from his voice. "We'll fight it." That, Sam said, was when Priya really laughed. A hollow, broken sound that carried across the lawn. "With what money, Tom?" she asked, her voice dripping with scorn. She pulled her wallet from her purse and threw a platinum credit card onto the table next to the phone. "I tried to book a moving van while I was yelling at him, just in case. Declined. I tried the emergency card. Declined. They're all declined." Sam said he watched Tom's face crumble as he pulled out his own phone, his fingers frantically tapping at his banking app. He didn't have to say a word. The look of pure, cold dread that washed over him was answer enough. My quiet phone call to a customer service representative had done more damage than 1,000 angry arguments. I hadn't just taken their future. I had dismantled their present. They were no longer conquerors standing in their new castle. They were just two people, trapped in the beautiful entryway of a house that no longer belonged to them, with no money, no leverage, and the very real threat of legal action hanging over their heads. The fight was over. All that was left was the collapse. A week later, I found myself back in David Chen's quiet 7th-floor office. The city of Austin hummed. Below us, a distant muffled sound. Outside the large window, the sky was a clean, pale blue. The storm had passed. David slid a thick, leather-bound folder across the polished table. The gold lettering on the front was simple, elegant, and final. The Carol Miller Foundation. "This is the last piece of it, Frank," David said, his voice soft. "Once you sign this, the funds from the sale are permanently transferred. There's no going back." I looked at the folder, but what I saw was Carol's face, her hands in the garden, the look in her eyes the day we burned the mortgage. Papers. She had believed in building things that last. Priya and Tom had only believed in things they could spend. I finally understood that the house was never the true inheritance. The real legacy was the values we had built within its walls. The money was just the raw material, the lumber and nails, to build something new that honored her spirit. "It's not for them," I said, as much to myself as to David. "The money, I mean. It was never really about punishing them." "I know," David said. "Revenge is a temporary satisfaction. A legacy is a permanent one." He opened the folder. The mission statement was a single paragraph we had worked on together. To provide scholarships and tool grants for students entering the trade schools of Central Texas. Honoring the dignity of working with your hands. It was simple. It was honest. It was everything Carol and I had ever believed in. I picked up the pen. It felt light in my hand now, no longer a weapon, but a tool for building. As I signed my name, I wasn't thinking of Priya's panicked screams on the phone or the look of utter defeat on Tom's face. I was thinking of some kid I would never meet, a young man or woman with calloused hands and a dream, getting a letter in the mail that said someone believed in them. I was turning my family's ugliest moment into someone else's brightest opportunity. I pushed the signed document back across the table. A profound, unshakable peace settled over me. It wasn't the thrill of victory. It was something deeper, quieter. It was the feeling of a debt being paid, not by them to me, but by me to the memory of the woman I loved. The battle was over, but it wasn't their downfall that defined my victory. It was this. The quiet act of creating something good from the wreckage. "Carol would be proud, Frank," David said, closing the folder. I looked out the window at the vast Texas sky, and for the first time in 2 long years, I felt the warmth of the sun. On my face, I think, I said, a small smile finally reaching my lips. She already is. True family is built on mutual respect, not one-sided entitlement. When your love is treated as a resource to be spent, setting firm, quiet boundaries is essential. It's not about revenge, but about preserving your dignity and teaching that consequences are a more valuable inheritance than unearned wealth. Have you ever had to stand up to a family member who took you for granted? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories.